Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About HR. And today we're joining you from the Big Apple, from New York, over here in the beautiful United States, the day before the big the day of the Harris-Trump election debate. So that will have happened by the time this airs. So who knows what world we'll be joining you from. Absolutely thrilled to welcome you today to the show. I've got Rachel Peck, and we are going to be talking about listening. And listening as an undervalued skill. Rachel, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
And you are, as we were just talking about, the founder of Metronome. Could you just tell us a little bit about what you guys do, the sort of consulting work that you help your clients with?
Absolutely. So I'm really excited to talk to you about listening as a core skill because we do a lot of listening at Metronome. A couple of sort of buckets of work that we are lucky enough to get to do. Executive coaching. So we work with leaders across whatever leadership challenges they're facing through one-on-one or group coaching. We do facilitation, whether that's an offsite, a team event, a moment in time where you want to bring people together for a facilitated experience, and then workshops. So actually training people in core skills like listening, among others. So that's what we do. Have been doing it for the last 3 or 4 years. Previously was in-house at a company called Harry's, where I worked for about 10 years. So excited to be talking to you about all of it.
Very cool. So let's jump straight in with listening. It is not a skill that you weirdly hear talked about very much as something that's important for business. I think we talk about a lot of things that are sort of surrounded or underpinned by listening. But why is it that you spend so much time thinking about it as a really important core skill?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally speaking, many of the most important things that we can do as leaders are some of the most fundamental things that don't often get the airtime. They're not interesting and sexy, but they're like really core to doing a good job, like caring about people, listening, like some of these like fundamental foundational things. And so I am really interested in listening, and I have been for a long time, really ever since I worked for a boss that was really good at it. I think I saw role modeled what it means to be a really great listener and got interested in it. I think it's a skill that is foundational to a lot of the other things we talk about. So when we talk about feedback, I think really good listening is at the heart of that, both giving good feedback and receiving feedback. When we talk about communication more broadly, whether you're trying to inspire someone or motivate someone or correct something, like I think that listening is at the core of that. Setting strategy, you got to listen to your customer, you have to listen to your team, you have to listen to the market. So it's like one of those sort of everywhere and nowhere skills where I think if we can talk about it more explicitly and as a skill unto itself, we're going to learn a lot. We're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to level up. It's just one of those really important, lesser known things that leaders can think about.
It's one of these fascinating topics where, as you're talking, it's so obvious why it's such an important skill.
Well, why would you say it? What are you thinking? Why do you think it matters?
I think it matters because the business world is so complex. I mean, at the bottom of everything, at the bottom of any interaction, any sale, any high-performing, low-performing team are the different factors that motivate people. Yeah. And them being, I'm a big believer that everyone's the star in their own movie, right? And everyone else is just a supporting actor. Yeah. And if you're going to influence or if you're going to collaborate with someone, you really need to understand what their intrinsic motivators are. Yeah. And I guess that the best way to do that is to ask questions and listen to what they're saying. But it can be quite hard to listen to people, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that that's right. I think that if it were easier, more people would do it better.
So what would you say then is, so I would guess, correct me if I'm wrong, that most people consider themselves to be good listeners.
I think that's true. I think that most people are like, I know how to listen, in the same way that most people consider themselves good walkers, right? Like it's not something you spend a lot of time thinking about. So you're like, yeah, I can do that. But actually, I don't think a lot of people are as good as maybe they could be or should be.
So what are the things that people get wrong that they don't realize they're getting wrong.
Yeah. There's all the superficial stuff, which I don't think we have to spend a ton of time on because that's sort of boring, right? Like if you have your phone out, if you're distracted, if you're multitasking, like you're not going to be deeply listening. So you need to be present. You need to actually be processing, consuming, taking in information. That's sort of table stakes. But then
Actually, before we move on from table stakes, just because you got me on a bugbear, which is something that the phone out thing is so big, and I hate it. But then I find myself hanging out with my toddlers, and I've got a phone in my hand.
Yeah.
And what am I doing?
Yeah. Well, why do you have the phone in your hand?
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just there.
Yeah.
It's like an appendage.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Sometimes when I ask people that question, they give me a pretty good justification, right? So they'll say like, oh, well, I'm worried, the nanny or the daycare or the school is going to call, or like, I don't wear a watch, so it's the only way I can look at time. And so I actually think that it is worth thinking about, like, it might just be pure habit, but there might also be a reason for the phone in the hand. And so in order, if that's a change you want to make, like not playing with the toddlers with the phone in your hand, I would push you to like really think about like why is that phone in my hand? Because until you address that, I don't think you're going to be able to easily put it away.
Yeah. And I'm going to have to do some soul searching on that one.
Yeah.
But I know it's superficial.
Yeah.
But I also do think that
the presence.
Sometimes the physical things you do really matter. But let's go deeper. I just had to jump on the phone thing.
Yeah.
Let's go a little deeper.
No, I do appreciate that. I think that I'm sort of like poo-pooing it because I'm like, oh, that's not interesting. No one wants to talk about the basics. But actually, like the basics probably are a good place to start. And for a lot of people, I think figuring out like what are the roadblocks or the things that are getting in the way of your presence, whether that's wearing a watch that's buzzing at you, whether that's having your phone on the table, whether that's having 100 tabs open. It's different for different people. I think when we're interacting with folks online, it's hard because we're on our computer. So we're like in the middle of our own distraction as we're talking to someone, right? So I think that is step 0, which is reflecting on what is getting in the way, like physically, from my ability to really listen. And then what can I do at the root cause to solve that? So if I have my phone out because I am worried that I'm going to get an important call, why don't I set up a specific alert on my phone where nothing comes through except for a loud ring if my nanny's calling me, and then I can sort of like breathe easier. If I have a bunch of tabs open because I don't want to lose my place, why don't I just develop a practice of minimizing the entire browser so that I can still keep all my tabs but not have them up in my face? So I think that your point is well taken. Let's deal with the physical and the more surface level distractions first.
Great. So we've got all of them out of the way. Our tabs are closed. Our iPhones are away.
Yes.
And our Apple Watches, which I also don't get, a lot. That's a whole another story.
I'm wearing an old-fashioned watch that forces me to do basic math in increments of 5.
I've got one from it was my dad's first watch.
Yeah.
He got it when he was 21 from his dad.
Wow.
And then you have to wind it up.
Wow. My dad had a watch like that was from his grandpa, and he would wind it every day, and it's such a lovely story and experience.
See, we need to do more winding.
More winding.
And less alerts. Right. So
that's the name of the episode. More winding, less alerts. You'll have to listen to understand what the heck we're talking about.
Absolutely right. So we've done all the physical distractions. Let's talk about that level deeper. How do you become a great listener?
Yeah. I don't have like 1, 2, 3. Like I think different people probably struggle with different challenges or different things that get in their way, but I'll share some of the things that I've learned from talking to lots of people about this topic. And then I'd be curious for your own sort of self-reflection on your own listening and what works or resonates for you. I think lots of people listen for, I don't want to say the wrong thing because there's not a right or a wrong, but they listen at a specific level when I think there are multiple levels of listening. And so it's helpful to talk about that. So a lot of people listen for information. That's when they're thinking about listening, what they mean. So what should we have for dinner? We should have spaghetti and pasta. Spaghetti and pasta is the information, right? But underneath the information, there are emotions, and there are, even below that, needs. And I think that a lot of people try to listen for the information, for the context, for what's actually happening in a conversation, but they don't really care to to go beneath it. Or it's not that they don't care, but they're just not attuned to going beneath it. When I really push people, if you're really trying to listen to what someone's saying, but also listening to the emotions beneath that and to the needs that are even underlying, in order to actually understand what's going on for that person and respond and address it appropriately. Does that make sense, or is it helpful to share an example?
Well, I love an example. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm trying to think of an example that might be relevant to lots of people at work. So let's say you're in a project kickoff meeting and someone who is new on your team is putting forth a timeline for the kickoff, right? So they're saying, okay, on Monday, we're going to have the first draft ready for the client. By Wednesday, we want revisions from everyone on the team. And by Friday, we'll be able to package that all up, send it to the designer, send it off to the client. Relatively straightforward. So I'm in that meeting, I'm saying, okay, I'm going to be a great listener. If I'm listening for information, what I'm listening for is like, okay, what I'm hearing is that on Monday, we're going to have this, by Wednesday, by Friday. But beneath that, if I am really trying to listen deeply to that person, I'm listening not just for those facts, but for the emotions beneath that and the underlying needs. So the emotion might be, this person feels overwhelmed by this timeline. This isn't just sharing information and dates. Beneath it, there's maybe some body language that they're sharing. Maybe you notice that they're checking their notes in a way that's indicating some nervousness. Maybe they're just in their tone reflecting like it's going to be kind of tight. It's Wednesday, whatever it is, you're listening for that emotion. And I'll explain why it's helpful to listen for that. But then beneath that is need. So maybe this is a new person on the team. You're sensing that from an emotion perspective, they're overwhelmed. Their need is to do a good job. They want to be part of the team. They want to be perceived and received as someone who is doing well. And so they're putting forth this timeline, but the need is like me, or like or value me or whatever it is. And so by listening at all those levels, you give yourself then as a leader this amazing ability to speak to all of those levels. So maybe you want to confirm dates and information. Great. Maybe you want to make someone feel more at ease or relax their feeling of overwhelm. Maybe you want to sense their overwhelm and actually change the timeline so that the team doesn't feel like they have to rush. Maybe you just want to forget all of that and like validate that person and just say, before we even move on, I want to acknowledge and highlight that like you're new on this team, you're drinking from a fire hose, there's a lot going on, and you've done a really nice job putting together a draft of this timeline. Now let's talk about it together. And so you can see when you're really listening at all those levels, you have this toolkit as a leader to be able to address really whatever aspect of that person or that project that feels most impactful to you.
That was a fantastic example. It really brought it to life. And I'm sort of thinking about maybe the other side of this. And you spoke right at the beginning. I'm proving that I'm listening here.
This is not a test.
Everything's no. You spoke right at the beginning of, you got into this or you were interested in this because you had a manager who was a fantastic listener. How did that make you feel as someone on their team?
Well, I think it makes you feel incredibly valued and supported and held, right? Like it feels really good for someone to see you. I think as human beings, we have a fundamental need to be seen, understood, valued, and listening really does that. And to answer your another aspect of your question, which is like what makes you good at listening, I think one of the things that this leader did really well was he wanted to listen and to make sure that people feel listened to. So he would actually like go out of his way to find opportunities to seek input, to seek perspectives. There was a real curiosity that was fundamental to his leadership that just makes you feel really important. And he would go on these listening tours, he would call them. So he'd have something that he was focused on as a CEO, and he, before making a decision on that topic or taking action, would intentionally seek out lots of different perspectives from lots of different people in the organization. So maybe we're struggling to hire, as an example. We're not hiring at the pace that we need to, or we're not hiring the quality of candidates we need to hire. He would take that question, like what's going on around our hiring, and talk to 10, 15 different people one-on-one in small groups to try to hear from different voices in the organization and really synthesize and play back what he was hearing before making a decision. And it makes you feel good.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just, the reason I'm pausing is I'm just thinking because I try and avoid avoid being overly, I guess, operational or systematic about these sorts of things. But it does sound like there are things that we can do as leaders to be more to be sort of systematic about the way that we go and listen.
Yeah.
Have you seen, so you spoke about, that person who was your manager or your CEO before.
Yeah.
Have you seen people that have kind of toolkits to help themselves go out into the world and create those environments to hear, environments to listen?
Yeah, like, is there a playbook that you can start, like...
I love a playbook.
Love a playbook. But before I answer the question, I promise I will, I'm curious why you have a reaction to being operational, and talk about, like, your own leadership. Why are you averse to it?
I wouldn't say necessarily I'm averse to it. I think that at this topic, listening feels like something you do authentically. And being overly trying to insert structure into something that is authentic risks draining the authenticity out of it and building in a sort of business purpose for it.
Yeah.
It's like putting in a calendar reminder around your key team members' birthdays.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, weirdly, we do have on our Slack, right? It sort of pops up with birthdays. But it kind of I'm worried that it takes away from that authentic leadership piece. That's the hesitation.
I hear you. It's like part of the magic of it is the spontaneity, or is the authenticity. And it feels like by creating systems around it, you're robbing it of some of its sort of like inherent you-ness or something. And I appreciate that perspective, but I want to draw a distinction between creating systems, structures, scripts for the container of the thing versus the content of the thing. So I think that where systems are really helpful is in creating containers. Where systems are really bad is in filling that container with the you of it. Here's what I mean. I don't actually mind if a leader uses a calendar invite to remind themselves that it's my birthday. But I really feel gross if they use the same script to wish every person a happy birthday, right? Like, if like every birthday card is exactly the same, or if they put like a write happy birthday card to Rachel into ChatGPT. I think you can use structure to remind yourself of certain things, to create systems, to create listening tours, to create engagement surveys, to create a routine cadence for prioritizing listening personally and within your organization. But then you have to fill those structures and systems with authentic communication and like with your authentic leadership. So yes, this leader had a practice of doing things like, a quarterly listening circle or listening tour, one-on-ones with people to ask how it's going, like certain structures that maybe were a bit prescribed, candidly. But when he sat down at those tables, he was so authentically himself that like you don't really care.
And how about being specific about the things you're listening for? So I think one of the practices that I have set up recently is to take a pretty random selection of new joiners out for a lunch or for a coffee, just about 6 weeks after they've joined the organization. I want to get their first impressions. I want to figure out what we can do to improve.
Yeah.
I do struggle when it gets too operational. And I think part of the problem is listening for information. So I think I'm probably doing some of that. But can it still be listening if you say, I want to listen to this? Yeah, I want to talk about these specific things and create a bit of a, I guess, a bit more of a closed frame around the conversation. To be a good listener, do you need to allow a conversation to go anywhere at once?
It's a great question. I don't think you need to let a conversation flow in any which way to be a good listener. Here's my own personal heuristic around it, and then I would encourage you to actually create your own. Like, if it's not working for you, it's not working, so who cares, like, what I tell you? But for me, I say have a strong agenda loosely held. So I want to go in with, here's some questions I have. Here's some things I'm curious about. Here are some potential topics that we might discuss, whether that's over lunch or, over date night with your partner or over a new hire lunch or whatever it is. I'm going to be prepared to, have interesting questions and things that might be of value for me so that I know that I'm going to be authentically listening through that conversation. But what I'm not going to do is miss the interesting tangents and rabbit holes that maybe they're useful, maybe they're not useful, but if something interests me genuinely, I'm going to follow that thread because that's fun, because that's human, right? Like I'm not going to be so robotic or so outcome oriented in my listening that I miss something that is valuable. I did improv for lots of years, which is like very embarrassing. We can cut this out afterwards. But I bring it up because there's an amazing principle in improv where to find something funny in a scene or to even just progress a scene forward, what you should be doing as an improviser is to listen for what is unusual. What's something that's unusual? And that unusual thing might be someone's body language. It might be the way someone speaks. It might be their sort of syntax or sentence structure, like how they put something together. If you can find that unusual thing and sort of follow that usually leads you to something rather interesting.
That's fascinating. Yeah. Improv.
Improv, I mean, that's, talk about a side tangent. We could do a whole nother episode on the gospel of improv. But I was curious, so you said that those lunches don't feel great to you today.
No, that's not right.
This is why I'm asking. This is playing back.
I love those lunches.
Yes.
I love those lunches. My role and my brain, my role in the company and my brain, I find the any concerns or feedback that the team have around some of the more operational elements of sort of client delivery in particular, challenging because one of my big weaknesses is I love to solve problems. And actually those are problems that I'm not very good at solving, and I often don't know what to do with them. So sometimes I come out of those meetings a little frustrated with my own performance in the meeting, because I want them to feel like I've listened, and I want them to not only feel that I've listened, but also that I've done something about some of the things that they've suggested in the meeting. So it's just that output from the meeting that I'm finding a little challenging. I love those meetings.
Yeah.
And I think I get really great value from I guess those different perspectives. I want to make sure, and maybe this is a problem in itself, right? But I like when I can solve problems that people present me.
Yeah.
And maybe actually just speaking it aloud, I should just be a bit more relaxed about solving their problem, and I can take that and bring it away and speak to some other people and then come back, right?
Well, there's two sort of like meta points I want to make in the conversation we just had, because I think it's a really good example. The first is that when you're listening, the point is not always to get it right. It is to confirm that you're on the same page. So I did something that was like, this is what I'm hearing, or is it right that it's called a playback, or I call it a playback. Do that. And the beauty of the conversation is that like half the time you get it wrong. I got it wrong. I got it wrong. That doesn't mean I'm a bad listener. It means that I'm confirming understanding so that we can move the conversation to a deeper or more interesting place. And then Felix, your response brought it there. Like in you saying, no, that's not what I'm saying. Here's what I'm saying. It helps you be understood, and it took the conversation further. So thank you for that. Use that playback. And the other quick point that I want to make before we, I'm sure, dive back and forth in, is that sometimes at the end of a conversation, you want to take action. And sometimes at the end of the conversation, the action is confirming that someone was heard. And so I would offer to you that if really your intent is to listen more than to solve everything, I wonder how it would feel if you're like, okay, we're nearing the end of this conversation. We're not going to like wave a wand and solve everything. Here's what I heard. Here's what I'm going to do. And here's what I'm going to intentionally put on my icebox list of things that I might get to at some point, but isn't a priority for me or the company right now. Thank you. I think that is a really nice way to ensure that you have that closure without necessarily making that closure be doing a lot.
Well, that's fantastic advice. Now, let's talk about power disparity in conversation.
Yeah.
I have seen, not recently, it has to be said, there can be a challenge when especially if you're looking at, you're a chief people officer or you're a CEO and you're speaking to someone new in the business, someone junior in the business, or someone who, for whatever reason, they feel they don't have a lot of power in the business.
Yeah.
You go in with the best of intentions, you're asking questions. Some people could find that conversation to be quite challenging and sometimes a little scary.
Yeah.
What advice would you have to a leader that wants to actively listen, wants to be really curious, but it is aware of the fact that they're listening to someone who maybe doesn't feel like they have a voice or is worried about saying the wrong thing?
Yeah. I love that question because I think it's true. It would be naive to say that you can just sit down with everyone and they're going to give you a candid feedback. I think that the first thing I'll say is that I think there are lots of ways to listen. So some of that could be through a one-on-one conversation. Some of that could be through a group conversation. Some of that might be through an anonymous feedback form. Some of that might be through a meeting that someone else facilitates and summarizes the insights for you. You're not actually in the room as the senior leader, but you're receiving the sort of knowledge or takeaways that come from that conversation. I would not prioritize any one way of listening over any other. The prompt that I would have for you or for a client is, okay, what are you trying to get from this listening, from this conversation? And then what is the best way to get it? It might not always be sitting down one-on-one with someone. There might be other ways to really accomplish your goals. Like, so for example, if it's to build a relationship with someone, you sort of do need to sit down with them. But if it's really to like improve our performance review process, that might actually be a survey. That might actually be a focus group that someone else on the team leads. Like there are lots of ways to get that information. And so sort of pairing form and function or like fitting something to purpose is, I think, an important part of the conversation.
Now, I agree with that. I'm still interested in the question, though, around. So I still think it's important for those people who may not be comfortable initially in those environments.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you shouldn't sit down with them. So I wonder if you have any advice around, if you know that someone's nervous or you know that this is out of their comfort zone, what can you do as you are in a one-to-one situation?
Yeah.
What can you do to get the most out of them? What can you do to put them at ease?
Yeah. I think that one thing that you always have available to you as a leader is your vulnerability. So if you're asking them to go out of their comfort zone for something, a really good way to effectively do that is to put yourself out of your comfort zone for something. So I am much more likely to share with you if you've shared with me. So you start by sharing something that is not like, oh, like I have a twin or I grew up in...
I do have a twin.
I was listening. But, it's like, that's interesting. But like, if you're asking someone about something hard in your organization, or if you really want their feedback, like, why don't you share something that's vulnerable and true, which is like, hey, as a leader, this is one of, building a great team is one of the things I think is most important. And one of the things that I don't always do well, because I'm sometimes focused on results and I let that sort of relentless focus on results get in the way of really pausing to like hear people. That's something I am working on. But I wonder how, if starting with something vulnerable, that would sort of like shift the tone of the conversation. I think the other thing you have to do is really clearly and honestly set the frame or bounds. So like someone who's really junior is going to want to know, like, is my manager going to know about this? Is this going to impact my performance or my career? Like, maybe this is one of your first interactions with this person, and so they don't want to be perceived as negative. So you might want to say something like, hey, like, this is something that like I've really valued people who have like something critical and insightful to say about the business. Like, whatever it is, like really like bringing a lot of empathy to those power differential conversations, leading with vulnerability, setting those bounds and frames so that people can feel a little bit safer. And then knowing that it's a practice. I think that like you're not just going to sit down once if you're a leader who's never done this before and get the world's best feedback or like have the world's most interesting dialogue or two-way conversation. It's going to require a muscle, really, organizationally, of people in the org having the practice and repetition of knowing that I can sit down with Felix. I can tell Felix something about myself, something hard, something scary, and Felix will hold that information respectfully and like with dignity, and will sometimes do something about it. We'll sometimes maybe not be able to do something about it, but will really process and hear me. That takes time and that takes repetition, just like any relationship.
And you've got to build a relationship for it as a leader in an organization, because that new joiner is going to sit down with their manager or their peer and say, oh, Jesus, Felix has just like booked something into my calendar and I'm really nervous.
Yeah.
And you need them to say, don't worry.
Yes.
This is a thing he does. It's... I feel like people say that about me a lot. Oh, don't worry, it's just Felix.
It's just Felix. That's just Felix. Felixing.
But just be like, look, don't worry. He's not out to trip you up. He just genuinely wants to find out what you think. And that takes, as you say, that takes a while. We're on a topic that I think is really important, which is, and we've spoken a lot about how a leader can improve their listening game.
Mm-hmm.
How can we create listening organizations?
Cultures of listening.
Having listening that's really valued. Something, when I go on holiday, I know that other people are listening in the business. How do we do that?
Yeah, it's a really beautiful question. And I think that there's more that lots of organizations can do. And I think that it depends on the organization to really define what that means for you. So I would be curious after I share some thoughts to hear like what you do within your org. It sounds like there already are things that you do to create that culture. But I think some practices that I would recommend exploring or experimenting with. So one is to have those like systems of listening. So an example of a system might be an engagement survey where you're on some routine basis asking everyone in a formal way, how's it going and what could we be doing better? Then playing back those ideas across the organization. So, hey, we heard you. Here's what we heard. Role modeling it at the leadership level. So it is both a systems practice thing, but it is also a skill and behavior thing. And so having leaders really role model that, invest their time in that. I think that one of the things that gets in the way of listening can be our sort of urgency mentality. Like it takes time to be like, I want to go around the room and I actually want everyone to share their perspective on this. Or, let's take 10 minutes at the end of this meeting and actually just debrief and hear how everyone's feeling about the next steps in the timeline. It requires you to slow down, to build more time in your agendas, to build in those systems for it. But I think that it's one of those slow down to speed up practices that I would encourage leaders to explore.
Yes. And it's interesting because I think you to preempt your question about what we do, I wonder whether we have focused more on creating, it's more than I wonder. I think that we put the emphasis on creating a feedback culture, which I think probably shares quite a lot of the same hallmarks as a listening culture.
Yeah.
But shifts the emphasis from
giving to receiving. Right? Yeah.
So I think one of the things that we put a lot of effort in is sort of making sure that everyone knows, from the most junior person who's just joined to the most senior person who's been with us for ages, you can give feedback to anyone in the organization. Not only can you, but we expect you to. And not only do we expect you to, but we value you when you do that. So that's one of the best things that people can do in our organization is to share feedback. Fantastic if it's positive, even better if it's something that we can improve. So I think actually a lot of the things we're going to talk about that I say we do for listening, we actually do for feedback. But I think with a little massaging and tweak,
a little twist,
we can improve it. So we do engagement surveys regularly, probably averaging once a quarter, which is probably a little too much. People do complain about the number of surveys we get them to fill to fill in. And
you want enough time to actually take action on the survey to the point of listening, to prove that not only did I share my feedback and that's valued, but that feedback was really received and heard. And on a quarterly basis, you might not have the full time to build in that listening rep and that here's what we're going to do about it rep. But I'm curious, maybe you do that
Yeah, well,
quickly.
we have a monthly cadence of all hands, which again is quite a lot.
Yeah. No, I think it's nice.
But over the pandemic, we really learned that, we want to be a transparent business. We want people to know why we're making decisions. We would want them to, even when we're thinking about going down a certain course, we'd rather share early and often so that we can get that feedback and so that we can change our course of action accordingly.
Yeah.
So we then have everyone has a regular one-to-one with their manager. There is a section on that which is around feedback and around areas that they're struggling, around the more pastoral care side of things. We just had our first hackathons, which were around internal challenges that people were facing, and we're turning those into good action plans. That was like a big piece of listening, which was really fun, and we're going to do those quarterly. We've also, off the back of the hackathon, one of the big recommendations that was made is that we launch a shadow exco. We don't have a board, but like a shadow board, and we just launched that this month.
Cool.
Which is really, really exciting.
Yeah.
And I think creates that next generation of listeners and leaders.
Yeah.
So, those people will be responsible for going out into the business and sourcing things that they think are important at the highest levels, and we'll give them sort of privileged access to, there's not a lot of information that we keep from the organisation, but there are certainly sort of ideas and concepts that we kick around at Exco before sharing with the rest of the business. What else do we do? We try and do some sort of asynchronous things. I'm a really weird believer on the sort of the magic of the unstructured. So just grabbing a coffee with someone who happens to be in the office. Yep. We have a hybrid working culture. It's much easier to do the asynchronous stuff when you're in office.
Totally.
So I like to go in. I book no meetings. I just hang around and annoy people until they tell me interesting things.
Yeah, I love that. Well, it's that making time for it, right? And it sounds like, just from what you're saying, you make time for it in formal ways, through hackathons, through surveys, but also through informal means, which is, water cooler conversations, and not booking yourself so that you're back to back to back to back to back, so that you don't have time for that sort of spontaneous magic. Yeah.
One of the things I'm getting quite excited about in this conversation is switching the emphasis from getting feedback to listening. And I know they're two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
But it really does feel like the accountability is different.
Tell me more about that. I agree, and I'm glad you're bringing up that distinction between the emphasis on the feedback and the emphasis on the receiving the feedback, or the hearing the feedback. But I'd love to hear what makes sense about that for you.
There was there's a book, I can't remember who wrote it now, but it's called The 1 Minute Manager. It's like one of the, I'm sure you know it. Was it Dale Carnegie? No, it wasn't Dale Carnegie. He did the influencing bit. But anyway, there's a whole piece in it around trying to catch people doing things right.
Yes.
And listening feels more like that. It's your job to catch feedback from people and to pull that out. Whereas with feedback, it's their job to provide their peers and provide their, other people in the organisation, their colleagues, with things that they think they can do better.
Yeah.
And it feels like both are important.
Yes.
But we spend all of our time pushing for feedback and very little of our time thinking about how to train our business leaders to be better listeners.
Yeah.
No, everyone in the business to be better listeners.
Yes.
So
yeah,
I think that's just a really valuable, sometimes you have these reframes and it sort of changes the way you think about something you do in an organization. I think that's been a really cool thing I've taken away from
That's awesome.
today.
Yeah, here's my crude analogy. It's like if you're a baseball team, which is a very American analogy for you. While we're here. Exactly.
America's pastime.
While we're here, we'll give an on-brand baseball analogy. But it's like you can train your entire team to throw. But if you can't catch the ball, then you haven't actually made the connection. You haven't won the game, you haven't gotten the out, you haven't done the thing. And so when we're really emphasizing the feedback culture, it's almost like we're emphasizing the throwing, the giving, the sort of directing, the speaking up, the saying something. But if that doesn't land with grace and with empathy and with action, then it doesn't really matter how clear your feedback was. If someone can't take it, hear it, and do something about it, who cares?
And seek it. Which feels like a big piece. I can't believe we were speaking about our watches before. I can't believe what time it is.
We're almost at time.
We are almost at time. I think I want to pull it right back to something you said at the beginning, because you were talking about the you're talking about the information, the emotion, and the oh my gosh, I've forgotten what it's called.
It's sort of like underlying needs. You can call it whatever you want, but yeah, it's that, like, what is at the root of that person's need in that moment?
So, right at the root cause, then, what do you do with the need piece, right? So, presumably, sometimes that need is something you can't really do anything about.
Give me an example of a need that you can't do anything about.
So I think your example was someone's need to impress or to they're new in an organization, they really want to impress, and you as the leader, it's kind of right that they want to, right? They're coming into a business, they want to put their stamp on it. You've uncovered that, and maybe this goes back to my constant desire to solve problems, but
yeah,
do you even need to do something with that need? Do you need to solve it? Do you need to change it? Do you need to acknowledge it? Or is it just enough that, you have learned something more about that individual that you're looking to support just through thinking to yourself, just through that 1 second where you're saying, oh, what is it? What's the need at the bottom of this? What's Rachel actually, what does she actually want? Is that just a positive in itself?
As you're saying it out loud, I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, I think I kind of answered my own question there.
I didn't mean to do that. No, I mean, I think that you articulated that really beautifully. Like, I think that, like, sometimes it's enough to just acknowledge the humanity in someone, like the root of like what is going on. I think that breeds a lot of empathy. It breeds a lot of like grace. Like, it's like to just remind yourself that there's like a person on the other end of this business interaction, whether it's someone on your team, whether it's an external partner, whether it's someone you're negotiating with or an adversary, like whoever it is. It's like, oh, I see the need there. And then sometimes you can actually do something about it. And that doesn't mean you have to. And in fact, I would not recommend you like specifically say something like, your need right now is to see that.
I've analyzed what you said.
Exactly.
And actually what you're saying isn't that.
Rachel told me. I'm like, no. But if you can do something about it, this works, by the way. Everything we've talked about, like, thank me in your relationships and your personal life too. Like, it works in your personal life. So if you have like a partner, for example, who's like, hey, like, I need you to pick up the kids, I am running around, whatever, they might just need a moment of rest or maybe a moment of like acknowledgement of how much they're doing. Like, my husband did this the other day. I was solo parenting. I was tired. I was saying something that I needed him to do when we got home. And his response was, I just really want to thank you for like holding it down at home while I've been away at work. Like, I value, like, it's really nice. Like, I felt like I could like be focused, do my work. It had nothing to do with the thing that I was asking, but it was clearly what was underneath the thing that I was asking, And if you can find those ways to like authentically, to your point earlier, speak to that need or address that need or acknowledge that need, it feels really good.
It really does. And it creates those interactions you remember for a long time.
Yeah.
Rachel, we're out of time. Thank you so much for coming on the pod. I loved this conversation.
It was so much fun. I really enjoyed it. And I am curious to hear what sort of, as you're thinking about this over the next couple of days or weeks, what's coming up for you. I would love to stay in touch about listening and all things.
I will keep you in the loop.
Thank you.